Welcome to the Jenny Carlson Show. This week, we are going to talk Thunder. We are going to talk about the Western Conference. We are going to talk about the NBA, and that's because, my friends, the NBA season is getting going. What a great time of the year. But before we get to that, I want to say a quick word of thanks to these great sponsors for supporting the Jenny Carlson Show. Oklahoma Ford Dealers, Laser Light Skin Clinic, MidFirst Bank, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Fire Lake Golf, and Fire Lake Arena. And remember, drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. Now, if we're going to talk Thunder and we're going to talk NBA, nobody better to join me than my Sellout Crowd cohort, Jon Hamm. Jon, how are you?
Jenny, it is my Christmas. With all due respects to that time of the year, this is the most wonderful time of the year for me.
Yeah. I was at Thunder practice before they left on Tuesday, and there was kind of a giddiness in the air, and not Josh giddiness, just plain giddiness, first day of school type of giddiness. I think a lot of people who love the NBA feel the same way, Jon.
Yeah, and one of the things that I have done is kind of taken the temperature of a few fans. I've got something on Sellout Crowd where I talk to a few fans to talk about expectations. I've got the big friendly show with Jon Hamm is dropping with Jay Smith from Down to Dunk, where we also talk about that. And it's a lot of people are finding it very hard to keep it in check right now.
Well, let's not keep it in check. Let's be excited. Before we get to the Thunder, though, obviously this offseason saw a lot of superstar movement, trade demands. Some of those superstars landed where they wanted, some did not. Kind of big picture to start out with, Jon. What does any of this signal about the league, where it is and where it might be going?
Yeah, there was a lot of discourse, again, because Damian Lillard didn't get to go to Miami, and he wound up in Milwaukee, which might have been a better location for him, right? And so we keep having these discussions about player empowerment, but it's really superstar empowerment. And, superstars have a way of throwing their weight around and winding up where they want to go most of the time, not all the time. It's not a new thing. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar back in the 70s went to Milwaukee, went to the Bucks management and said, I want to go to Los Angeles or New York, or I believe Washington, D.C. at the time, wound up in L.A. And that's kind of how these things tend to work. So, but every situation is a little bit different. James Harden doesn't have a whole lot of weight to throw around right now like he used to. Can't really just magic his way to his next location. And, but, I honestly think it's just sort of a continuing trend that if you have a superstar that is in the prime of his career, that still, carries a pretty big mallet with them, they can usually wind up where they want to go. If not, they wind up at a pretty good spot, not towards the bottom of the league.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how the Lillard-Giannis matchup works. We'll get a look at that moving forward. Lots of eyes on Milwaukee, but lots of eyes around here, obviously, Jon, like you referenced before, expectations among Thunder fans, people who cover this team, people who are a part of this team, just really feeling like this is a team on the rise. I'm curious, though, from your perspective, what are your expectations? What do you think is realistic for this bunch? Sort of now in, year 4 of the rebuild?
I've gone back and forth quite a bit. I can see the case that it's a young team, that they're a year away. Then I watched them play last season, and granted, there was some context there. This was pointed out by one of my guests, Gideon Hamilton from the Sports Animal on my show, that the Thunder missed a lot of superstars on opposing teams throughout the season. That's a factor. But still, just when you look at how this team plays, how they're constructed, how well they did last season without Chet Holmgren, and now they're adding Chet Holmgren, and they're adding in more experienced Josh Giddey, more experienced Jalen Williams. I just decided to just plant my flag on 46 wins. And that's sort of kind of where I'm thinking right now. That feels like it's kind of in the middle. They could certainly exceed that. They could certainly fall below that. They could fall below that and still improve as a team. And so that's kind of where I've landed. And I think generally you talk to a lot of, reasoned analysts out there, and then that's about the range they're thinking as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, Vegas gets in on the act this time of year too, says they believe the Thunder's going to win 43 and a half, the 20s. That was a few years ago. 43 and a half, 44 and a half is kind of in the ballpark of what most of the Vegas prognosticators say. But, 45 wins, that would have put the Thunder safely in the playoffs a year ago. But 43, is stuck in. You sneak in at 7th, but it's start to see just how fine a line things are in the West, because wins are so tough in the West. How does that factor into everything, John, when you look at the conference that the Thunder finds itself in?
Yeah, I mean, the West has been a bear for a long time. And, somehow the Thunder, especially during the, Durant, Westbrook, and Paul George years, always, found themselves very competitive in that group. And it's going to be no different this year. Now, again, it's the start of the season. Everything is bright and shiny. And Charles Barkley has said that, the bad teams don't know they're bad yet. And so we're going to find out, eventually there's going to be, there's a few that we can identify right now. There's bound to be some teams that have injuries that cause them to sink in the standings. There's going to be some that just don't come together like we're thinking. I think the one thing you can look at Oklahoma City, you can look at the continuity. The fact that these guys have been together, building together for a few years. I don't know how many wins that is worth, but it helps when you're in a competitive conference like this where maybe some teams are kind of thrown together.
Yeah. It was interesting to look at some of the preseason prognostications out there at, just how many games these West teams were going to be able to win. And the East teams at the top, whether you're talking about the Bucks or the Celtics or whoever, they always have more wins than even the Nuggets, who I think most people agree is the best team going into the year. But, you even look at that opening night, the soft opening night for the NBA, the Tuesday night games, it was all West, all 4 teams, where the Nuggets, Lakers, and obviously the Suns and the Warriors. And I think a lot of people are looking at those 4 teams and thinking they're going to finish at the top of the West. Do you see those being the top 4 teams in the West, those 4 teams getting the home court advantage heading into the playoffs?
I hesitate with Golden State and the Lakers simply because those are older teams that have been there, done that. They know they don't have to hit the gas throughout the entire season. The Warriors last year, let Sacramento just go have a breakout season and then took them out in the playoffs, right? So that, you kind of have to separate where they're going to finish in the regular season and what kind of a playoff team are they going to be. So I wouldn't quite put Golden State, Lakers in somewhere in that top 4. I think it's going to be a couple of other teams. But come playoff time, you don't want to face either one of those teams. And, they've proven that consistently over the past few years.
So if those aren't your top 4 in the West, John, who else do you have sneaking in to maybe take those 2 spots that the Lakers and the Warriors may not occupy?
Yeah, that's it becomes a bit of a grab bag. I can make the case for several teams, potentially being up there. Obviously, if Sacramento, if that was not a 1-year flash in the pan for them, and there's reason to think that it wasn't, Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox are relatively young. Keegan Murray is going to improve in his second year. I think reasonable to expect that. Sacramento could find themselves back up there. New Orleans was trending very well in the right direction last season until injuries hit, particularly with Zion, but also with Brandon Ingram. The Clippers are also like a hypothetical team that just can't quite put it together, but maybe they're going to be encouraged to do so. So there's a number of teams I think that could compete for those spots. And I talked to some Thunder fans that think the Thunder are going to be squarely in those top 4. I can't quite go there yet. But, it would take a lot for that to break in that direction and happen. But there's some of these other teams that I think could compete themselves into one of those spots and, again, find themselves in a really tough matchup in round 1.
You list off all those teams that could potentially jump up there. And then, there's, like you say, the Thunder, the Grizzlies. I mean, there's a lot of teams that you think have potential. Obviously, the Ja situation in Memphis is going to be interesting. But with all those teams that are potential playoff quality teams, What's in your mind, John? What's sort of a reasonable ceiling for the Thunder? What would be about as high as you would think they could actually finish in this really difficult West?
If we go with 46 wins, if it's 45 or 46, that would probably put them again. Maybe 5 or 6, potentially 7. Maybe they have to, get into the play-in to try to secure a playoff spot. That's always kind of felt like a reasonable outcome based on where this team is trending. So that's what I've been looking at. Now, again, we're talking about regular season finish. Playoff experience is a whole other thing. And we saw this with the first generation of OKC where they had to, play their way through the playoffs to advance. And so even if this team makes the playoffs, gets a good seed, I think playoff basketball is going to be a different thing. And we might need to hold off on those expectations, like deep playoff runs, for just a little bit longer.
Yeah, let's have them get to the playoffs first before we start talking about the expectations for the playoffs.
Yes. And I've seen, again, some people are starting to think big picture here. And again, Sam Presti has pointed out many times they did not finish 500 last season. So they're trying to hit the brakes too.
Yeah. As we talk about the West and how tough it is, how much are you or how much should other folks watching this team keep the West really in mind when we're thinking about growth, progress, win total, both in the maybe it's more difficult or maybe they navigate it well and it shows that they're maybe even further along. How much are you keeping that in mind, John?
Yeah, I'm looking at it, sort of like measuring sticks. How do they compete against some of these teams that we just rattled off earlier, some of those teams that we think are going to be some of the top 4 or 5 teams in the West. And then also comparatively, when they go up against a Houston that has been rebuilding for a similar amount of time, Houston was a trap for OKC last season. And then there was one game where they said, enough, we're going to beat the brakes off of them. But you've got San Antonio that's waiting in the wings too. And, it's going to be kind of a measuring stick, like how far ahead of those teams are you? And all right, how do you compete against the Denvers and the Phoenixes and, Golden States and those teams? And, can you bring it night after night? So, yeah, it's going to be a bear of a season, but there's a lot of things along the way that I think that they can take away from each matchup.
For sure. Yeah. Hey, can we just for a sec, can we step back again and think about this West just to talk about the conference, how difficult it is. We've been talking about this since you mentioned the first iteration of Thunder as a contender. We've been talking about it since then, John.
Yeah.
How is it possible that over a decade, and now heading into 2 decades, the Western Conference is where the top to, down into 10, 11, 12 is so difficult. Granted, the East has got some top heavy teams. They've got some really good squads at the top, squads that have won titles. I get all that. But how has the West continued to be the place where teams are just so good from top on down?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And remember, it used to be called the Leastern Conference when LeBron was playing for Cleveland or Miami. Yeah. And, people would discount like his accomplishments because he had a pretty easy path to the finals, and then the Western Conference teams just beat themselves up. It's a combination of things. I can point to just lottery luck falling more, I think, in the favor of some Western Conference teams along the way. You go back and think, like, what if Charlotte had got the number 1 pick and got Anthony Davis the year that New Orleans got him? Maybe that tilts things a little bit. Now, Charlotte's a different situation, but that takes me to my next point about ownership. The class of your organization, I think, plays a part in this as well. And, there's a lot of class organizations in the Western Conference. And not only that, there's, your destination markets, your LA, the Bay Area. Houston is a sneaky destination market. And it's just the talent has just migrated west over time for a variety of reasons. And sometimes it's, other teams want to compete against, San Antonio or the Lakers or whatever. And so they build up their team to try and take them on. And it's drained a lot from the East over time. So a whole lot of factors. And the crazy thing too, Jenny, is you talk about that first Thunder run, the Lakers were not good during a good stretch of that time. And so while we're talking about the cream of the crop in the West, the Lakers weren't even there for a lot of that. And, good luck duplicating that again.
Yeah, it does seem crazy. And I think about now what we were talking about earlier with these superstars demanding trades. It feels like it's kind of become this snowball because you start to get good teams with great players, and then more great players want to join them. I think that's become part of the equation of late, John.
Oh yeah, no. These guys like company, and just like we saw with Kawhi Leonard wanting someone to pair up with him to go to the LA Clippers, and you got LeBron James going to the Lakers and recruiting Anthony Davis, and recruiting other superstars along the way. That's been the thing for the past several years as well. So there have been more of those headed west than in the East. Obviously, Miami did that with the big three, and then Cleveland did it when LeBron went there. But for the most part, it's been in the West, and that's what it's been all about. And I don't know if it's changing anytime soon, especially now that Wembanyama is going to be in the Western Conference.
Yeah. Suddenly San Antonio becomes a destination. I just think everybody in the West was pleased that Damian Lillard went East. Get him out of the West at least, have him go somewhere else. Have him be somebody else's problem. All right. Before we finish out, John, quick lightning round, sort of looking to the end of the year. We've talked about the Thunder a lot, but now let's go all big picture on this. Lightning round. Who wins the NBA title this year?
Boring answer, Nuggets. I'm going to default to them for for now until I see something that changes my mind. I'm going to stick with the Nuggets.
Hey, that's not a bad pick at all. What about MVP? Are you going back to Denver for that answer too?
MVP is very narrative based. Joel Embiid sort of, I don't want to say like voters were like, fine, it's his turn, but it did feel like they were a little tired of voting for Jokic. I think maybe that fatigue may be over.
Okay. All right. I said we were looking big picture, but I lied. I got a Shai question. Is Shai first team all NBA again this season?
I'm going to say no. I have 3 reasons for it, and none of them have to do with like Shai becomes a worse player. 1, all NBA teams are going to be positionless this coming season. 2, there's a player participation policy that is going to encourage guys to suit up in order to become an all NBA player. And, look at the Clippers. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are still very excellent basketball players that if they play 65 plus games and the Clippers are really good, one of those guys could come in and take away a guard spot. And not to mention a guy like, Devin Booker, who was not on an all-NBA team last year, that if he plays the number of games, he's probably going to make it. And then my other reason is that I wouldn't be surprised if Shai takes kind of a statistical step back just because, Jalen Williams and Chet are going to get their shine, and Josh Giddey's going to, ideally take a step forward. I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen as well. And again, now if the Thunder wind up as one of those hypothetical top 4 teams, that could change things. But there's a lot of other factors around the league that could push them down into second or third team, which is still very excellent, by the way.
Yeah, definitely so. Well, hey, John, this was awesome. Thanks for doing this. Enjoy your Christmas morning, your Christmas week. That's awesome. I love that.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great time. Thanks for having me, Jenny.
You bet. Thanks to John, and thanks to all of you for joining the fun this week. If this was your first time hearing or watching the Jenny Carlson Show, be sure to subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Did I mention that you need to subscribe? Yeah. Also, if you like what you hear, please leave a review. And remember, you can find all my work at selloutcrowd.com and John's as well. We're there, all sorts of Thunder coverage as this season gets kicked off. Thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you next week.